Hi, this is Brad Willems, plan giving consultant with the Donor Motivation Program in Canada. Today we're going to welcome our guest, Tom Berekoff, who is an advisor to charities, and we're going to talk through some of the issues that we as the not-for-profit sector are struggling with in the midst of this COVID virus. Welcome, Tom. Great to have you with me today, as we are obviously wrestling through really new times here as it relates to the not-for-profit sector. Wow, what a time of emotion we're all experiencing, both loss, but also the feeling of isolation. And there's just a lot of fear in the marketplace. And from your perspective, what are you seeing out there as you're visiting with some of the charities that you work closely with?
Yes, Brad, all of those emotions, fear, uncertainty, insecurity, but also for some, a real sense of purpose. Those who really feel that COVID is really just putting an exclamation point on the reason why they exist, it's giving them cause to be even more courageous than they have been, which to me is why we have charities in place. So it's a full continuum, but it's really, really important at this point in time that charities have a really clear game plan in terms of what they're communicating, how they're communicating, and what they're doing. Especially now, we need to be relevant into this current space that we're in.
I love the word you use, courage. I'm often challenging the senior executives of charities that I work with that we're in the charitable business to make big change, not incremental change, big change. And that takes courage. And it takes a lot of courage in a period of time where everything around us seems to be very fluid and uncertain. From your perspective, what is the preferred approach that charities should use right now to interact with their donors during these extraordinary times?
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. One of the first things I think is really important is a really high measure of sense of gratitude, and coupled with that, a lot of grace towards your donor. They're facing incredible uncertainty in their own right, depending on their life stage, depending on their incomes and wealth. A lot of them are unsure about what that next payday or how they're going to sustain themselves, let alone be loyal to their charities. So this is now when we spend a lot of time as charities talking about being donor-centered, being in a relationship. Well, we get a chance to authenticate that now. And we do that by communicating with our donors. What are we saying to them that really matters? How do we show to them that they matter, not just their money matters?
Wow. So what can charities do then to help donors make meaningful decisions, particularly as it relates to plan giving? I would think that during periods of time, each of us think of our mortality a little differently, and it might cause us actually to stop and wonder if the plans that we've set in place for our estate, for example, still meet the priorities that we had previously set, or has any of this caused us to rethink even our own estate plans?
You hit a super important point, and definitely, I think the donor in general is thinking about all things relative to their estates and their future and their charitable plan, both now or in their lifetime, but also beyond their lifetime. And so as charities, I think we have a really unique opportunity. If in fact we have those authentic relationships, we have a unique opportunity to step into that space and ask them how we can help them gain clarity about what it is they want to do if in fact those needs and aspirations have changed, whether it's in their lifetime or beyond. And so again, I think the more we can bring a measure of expertise without kind of crossing that line about advising and bringing in experts such as you to help the donors who are entrusting their resources to us. But how do you help the donor? We bring a measure of expertise that perhaps the donor motivation program could offer that the charity can't.
Right. I mean, you often hear the words moving from a transactional relationship to a transformational relationship. And it would seem like we are at a very unique time in history where it's going to be really evident those who have moved or are moving to transformational versus transactional relationship. What are you seeing in that way?
Yeah, Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think in general terms, we see in the whole charitable sector that donor retention is at an all-time low.
Hmm.
And a lot of the reason for that is that there's an extremely low level of communication with the donor beyond their gift. So too often we've heard, the only time I hear from you is when you're asking me for money. Well, what about fulfilling the story? We tell the donor what we're going to do. What about telling them what we have done with their resource? So stewardship's an incredibly important part of that. I think another part of that communication with the donor is reminding them about the mission, vision, and the purpose of our charities. We live those things every day as charities, but our donors don't. And so it's really important to highlight for them what really matters. And I think, again, for them, it's really important to reinforce that, in fact, we've been doing good work with the investments that they've made. We have contributed to some positive impacts and outcomes and changes in our communities or in our society, or even more broadly. The donor needs to know that. They need to know that their monies have been put into good use. And I think a last part of this is, especially at this time, we're dealing with significant, important, and in sometimes urgent issues. Can we step in legitimately as charities into those things? Are we significant? Are we important? Are we urgent? And if we are, we really need to, again, amplify what it is that we're doing, because we want to help the donor make wise choices with us.
It would seem that there is the opportunity for a number of organizations to do fairly strong pivots to meet the real needs of people around them. And it will be interesting to see as we move, say, a year out from this point in time, what organizations have learned about themselves, which they may want to discontinue, and what they've learned about themselves that they see now as really significant strengths of their organization, of impacts that they can make in their communities. I think it's going to be a really interesting time to look at how charities actually do use this time for real deep introspection, but not introspection to cower into a corner, rather introspection for opportunity and effectiveness moving forward.
Brad, that's so wise. What you're suggesting has such wisdom to it. And in that introspection, I hope that they look at the bigger part of what their ecosystem is. And that ecosystem includes both the donor, but also the beneficiary. So as we reflect on what it is we're doing that matters, let's make sure they're part of that conversation. Let's make sure they're part of the measurement and benchmark of saying, did we do good? Did we do the right things? Did we do it effectively and efficiently? What could we do better? And not be afraid of those questions, but to really lean into them in a big way.
So are you, as you think about this sector, are there certain changes long term, but even short term, that you think we're likely to see in the sector, just from your perspective right now?
Yeah, tough question. I think on the negative side, I think we're going to see some contraction, that we'll probably lose some charities. Present forecasts are saying that we could lose up to 40% of the charitable donations that generally happen on an annual basis. Yeah, we could lose 200,000 jobs. And when we think about that, we need to think about that from the delivery side of what are the works that happen in our communities that aren't going to be able to happen if we lose those people from our sector. And let's keep in mind, and I know you know, and others probably know this, but the charitable sector in Canada employs 2 million Canadians. It represents our largest industrial sector, 8.1% of GDP.
That's an incredible number.
It is. We generate $150+ billion every year into the Canadian economy. We have about 3 million Canadians who volunteer, who contribute the equivalent of another million full-time equivalents into the workplace. Canadians are generous beyond belief. What we need to make sure that we don't do is we break what is probably the best charitable system in the world. We need to make sure that even in these difficult days, that we do what we can. And government is leaning in with wage subsidies and what have you. But as donors and as charities, we need to figure out how we can do better, how we can do different, how we can do together. And I think that's part of the equation of how do we not only live through this, how do we sustain, and then how do we thrive? And I really liked what you said. It's going to be different. And I don't think we should be fearful of different, because life is different. Everything is going to be different. So let's embrace that.
So Tom, you have been working in this sector now for almost 40 years. And what still keeps you motivated? Like, why are you still doing this? Like, this is an incredible sector, and you talked about the economic impact just briefly, but why do you still do this?
Well, it comes back to that core definition of philanthropy, the love of humankind.
Hmm.
And Brad, after an entire career of being in the sector, and I still get emotional every time I think about it because I put individual faces behind this. People are generous beyond any sense of logic or imagination. It's because they care for people.
Hmm.
And when we understand that, we want to do everything we can to help that sector along, to help charities along, to encourage donors. And so I just think it is the greatest role and privilege to be able to serve in this sector, and even to provide elements of nudging and focus and direction and mentorship at this stage in life. Whatever the sector needs to be able to move on, it's my duty, it's my privilege to be able to pass the baton forward into the coming generations, because I know in Canada what we do is great works for charity, and it will happen again in the next generations ahead of us.
Well, thanks, Tom. I concur wholeheartedly. After more than 30 years as a financial advisor in Canada, the last half a dozen years or so that I have focused a great deal of my attention on helping people to establish and create their own legacy plans, and particularly in the planned giving marketplace. I have just been overwhelmed time and time again as I sit with people and we discuss what the difference that they want to make and the choices that they're making in their estate plans and in their current giving strategies even. The overwhelming generosity that exists is incredible. And to use an old saying, it floats my boat. Every time I get to have a conversation with people like this, I just am inspired again to think about my own generosity, but also to think about the impact and, as you say, the faces behind these very generous gifts and plans that are set in place. And so I am just ultimately encouraged again that as Canadians, we will pour into this current crisis that we're in, and we're going to come out the other side better, stronger, more motivated, and ultimately more caring for those in our community who need our help the most. And so, Tom, thanks again for visiting with us today and for your expertise. And as we say these days, be safe.
Thanks, Brad. You too.